Hello, Peter from Universal Dork back again, and today I'm here to talk about a pretty awesome little late 80s animated one-off pilot that's very dear to my heart. It holds a lot of nostalgia for me, and maybe it will for you too if you grew up around in the 80s around the same time that I did and was also a big fan of Marvel Comics and particularly the X-Men, because today we've got a little segment of Trapped on VHS where we're talking about Pryde of the X-Men from 1989. Yes, this is a really unique one-off pilot, animated little 22-minute feature that was intended to be a much bigger X-Men series in the late 80s. This is a really unique little adventure. And I remember back in 1989 when this thing was announced, I heard about it originally in Comic Scene, a pretty popular comics magazine that had all of the dirt on all of the upcoming stuff in the comics arena. Also Marvel Age, Pryde of the X-Men, at the time I thought was maybe actually the first episode of an ongoing series, and that's what they intended this thing to be. There are some controversial takes on things in this that don't exactly line up with the comics, but hey, that was okay with me back then because up until that time in 1989, the only other time I'd seen the X-Men actually animated was in one of my favorite animated series as a kid, and probably till this day, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. There were a couple episodes where the X-Men appeared in that series. Growing up in the 80s, the Marvel stuff was not as accessible as it is today. Marvel was not a giant behemoth mega corporation. It was a pretty successful comic book company that was trying to expand into, TV. We had the Incredible Hulk live action series. We had a live action Spider-Man series. But the animated stuff really was starting to get some traction in the 80s with Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and then also The Incredible Hulk had one season as well. Now, I always liked The Incredible Hulk show during the 1980s. The Hulk was hands down my favorite, and probably to this day still is my favorite superhero. But I watched that and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends religiously back then. When I got wind of this thing, I was very intrigued. That was 1989. I think in 1989, I was about 15 years old, and I was all about the X-Men. So the X-Men, I think for teenagers in the 80s, it felt like these were stories that were sort of written for us as a teenager, because these guys were all kind of misfits, mutant misfits. They felt kind of like punk rock to me. Now, the way I can describe that is, aside from the fact that Storm back in the 1980s had that crazy mohawk, and the X-Men did indeed have sort of a punk rock look in the mid to late 80s. The X-Men were very different to me as a superhero team. All of the other teams kind of had these dashing heroes, sexy women and hunks, Captain America. Not to say, there's some sexy ladies and obviously some very good looking men here as well in the X-Men. But there was something about these guys that felt very mysterious back then and was very alluring to someone who was a teenager growing up back in that time period. And that's why I always loved the X-Men so much. They felt like they were stories that I could relate to in real ways as a teenager. So I was back in the Fox Valley, Wisconsin. I can remember the day that this thing premiered. Now, it wasn't much of a premiere. I looked in the TV guide and found out that this thing was playing at 6 a.m. in the morning on one of the regular stations that might show cartoons in the morning or something like that. And I remember setting my alarm, getting up to watch this. I was so excited. I had seen some preview still images in the comic scene. Like I said, Marvel Age had little featurettes about this thing that was going to be coming out, and it was possibly going to be launching a brand new series. So that would mean that I would be able to see the X-Men animated series potentially every week. And that was really exciting to me. So I remember getting up. It was all by myself. My parents were like wondering, what the fuck are you doing getting up at 6 a.m.? And, I had to say,
hey, I'm watching the new fucking X-Men show.
I don't think I said it like that, but. And the one thing that I did do back then, this is exactly what you had to do back in the 80s, was you had to have your blank tape ready, because I fucking had that shit all queued up the night before so that immediately when I got up, I would just start recording and I would get this thing on tape and I could watch it as many times as I wanted. Now, back in the day, that was a big deal to have something like that on cassette or catch it at the right time. If you missed it, you had to find a different time that it was going to be reappearing on TV and try to record it. So I recorded this thing and I watched it a bunch. And I will say, this thing did not disappoint. I really enjoyed it. Like I said earlier, there were a few things about this that were a little bit questionable. Right off the bat, I'm going to say they did this thing again with Wolverine, which was completely perplexing. Was Wolverine in this Pryde of the X-Men is Australian, and he talks with a completely ridiculous Australian accent.
Welcome her. Wait, she's not joining the X-Men, is she? She's just a kid.
That kind of bothered me, but I said, I don't give a fuck. Wolverine is in here. He looks really fucking cool. He had on his, tan, black, and brown suit, which is, in my opinion, that is the best Wolverine outfit of all time. I've never been a huge fan of the blue, yellow, and black one. I like some of the designs on it and stuff, but I always thought this was the sort of classic, tasteful Wolverine look. The other one just seemed a little bit too outrageous for him. This thing, I think, solidified his look as an ultimate badass. So he was wearing that in here. I couldn't be more happy, but he was also in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends in one of the episodes there. And come to find out, it was the exact same actor that voiced him in the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends series, probably 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 years before this, as Wolverine in there. And in that episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, he also had a goddamn Australian fucking accent.
Firestar, over here.
Coming, Cyclops.
This is our other new member, Wolverine.
Hiya, doll. Want a piece of fruit?
What is up with this Australian accent thing with Wolverine? We had Colossus, who is always an all-time favorite of mine as a kid. One of my favorite members of the X-Men. He is in here with his classic suit on as well. He's got an outrageous Russian accent, which was fine by me, but looking back at it now, it's pretty hilarious.
It is good, little one. Colossus like rain.
He's in there. We've got Storm in her classic outfit. You got Nightcrawler looking amazing. This was an interesting choice for them to include Dazzler on the team as well. She was pretty popular at the time. Come to find out, the reason they put her on the team at this time, they could have chosen, there's so many X-Men they could have chosen from, but now they chose Dazzler because they thought that she might resonate as almost the Gem and the hologram style character. I don't know if you remember Gem, with probably the catchiest cartoon theme song of all time. Gem is truly outrageous. So they had put her in there to kind of build off of the audience of Gem. And of course, you got Cyclops and Professor X as well. Kitty Pryde, who is kind of the main character, hence Pryde of the X-Men. The way it's spelled is kind of a play on that. Kitty Pryde's in here. She's joining the X-Men for the first time.
I guess I faced through the computer.
She has the power to walk through solid objects.
Her character is a little bit whiny in this, but like I said, even if I had a little problem with some of the characters and the way that they acted, I was just so thrilled to see this cartoon come to life. Absolutely amazing. I'm going to say that the animation here was also fucking amazing, and it holds up today. Now, the animation in here is way better than the 1992 X-Men series, the one that's so popular out there that they made a sequel to on Disney+. This episode, I think there is a reason, because it was the pilot and they were trying to build this into something more. I think that you got a little bit more bang for your buck here. They put a little extra into the animation. It's that same style of animation. I think it's Toei Industries or Toei Animation that they got to do. I think it was some of the same people that did the G.I. Joe stuff and the Transformers. So you've got a pretty simplistic story going on here too. It's basically, in a nutshell, the X-Men versus the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And the main part of the story that drives the whole thing is Kitty Pryde. As she joins the X-Men, she thinks she's a freak and she's learning how to use her powers. She arrives at the mansion and meets everyone. She's afraid of Nightcrawler. I mean, Nightcrawler looks fantastic in this.
Fräulein, you left before I could properly welcome you.
All the little effects for when he teleports and does his little bamfing all over the place. All of the energy effects in here are done with that crazy style of hand-drawn electricity. The White Queen's in here, Emma Frost, and she'll form an energy bolt and throw it. It looks so on point. The villains in here that they chose for the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, also really great. Some of them, Not really team appropriate from the comic books, like the White Queen. She was added, but I didn't care. And I still don't. I think it's a neat little one-off. You got Magneto. Magneto looks fantastic in here. The animation used to bring him, he just looks so sinister. All the detail on these guys, it's 5 steps above what you normally get. It's almost like the Transformers, the movie style, attention to detail and everything. You get the Toad in this, and I mean the good Toad, not the Toad from the 2000 X-Men movie. Nothing against him, but that to me is not the Toad. The Toad in this one is very comic accurate. He's a little mutated, like mental patient, basically, that's, you know, jumping around. He's got his little kind of like elf shoes on and his little like troll outfit on with his weird little collar. All the scenes with him, they give all of the villains and the heroes their moments to shine here, which I love. So even the Toad gets some pretty fantastic action sequences. You've got Pyro in here, who looks amazing. Very comic book accurate. You got the Blob. So you've got a really great group of villains, very classic to go up against the X-Men. A great Danger Room sequence when Kitty Pryde arrives at the mansion. Charles Xavier shows her around, and we get an introduction to every character. Like I said, their moments to shine are really fun in this, but they've got to move all this stuff along very quickly because it's 22 short minutes. Now, I wish this thing could have been an animated movie or an hour-long special. If you've never seen this before, the best thing about this is just the showcasing the fantastic 1980s animation that you get here. It is so good. It is so fun. You get to see all of your favorite characters as they were brought to life, pretty much, some of them for the very first time. So you also get Stan Lee here narrating this thing, which is always fun. And then come to find out, they even based a arcade video game on this. The Konami 1992 X-Men video game, the side angle one where you're running around beating people up, that is based on this. If you take a look back at that after watching this, you can clearly see that it's lifted from Pryde of the X-Men, which is very interesting that around that time they decided to give this a little bit of credit. It also spawned a 1990 graphic novel. Instead of redrawing this Pryde of the X-Men, they use still frames with thought bubbles and all of that stuff. And I suggest that anyone who is a fan of classic 1980s X-Men go back either and hunt this down or just go on YouTube and watch it. I saw earlier that someone made a Blu-ray of this that they were selling on Etsy, which I thought was kind of interesting. I'm assuming that it's just probably a rip from a VHS, but I would love to see a completely, totally cleaned up version of this. It looks beautiful even on VHS, so I can't complain there. Yeah, check out Pryde of the X-Men. If you've never heard of this thing before, it's a really neat little X-Men adventure and a strange little one-off that sadly never became anything. It would have been great to have a late 80s X-Men series. That would have been awesome. I really wish in the 80s we would have gotten some sort of comic accurate X-Men or maybe Wolverine movie would have been so cool. I really appreciate what they did in 2000 with Hugh Jackman, and I recently just saw Deadpool and Wolverine. I had a pretty good time with that. It wasn't my favorite. I think something about the Ryan Reynolds version of Deadpool really gets under my skin, but I guess that it's sort of supposed to. That thing was a bit too much of a farce. I was thinking if you're going to have Hugh Jackman one more time as Wolverine with the mask on and everything, I would have preferred to have seen him on a real adventure with real stakes. Fighting like, you know, the real Silver Samurai or Ogun, or teaming up with Kitty Pryde or something like that would have been much better than this meta Deadpool where he's making, you know, comments about MCU stuff and MCU online drama in the movie and Disney drama. It's like you have to be paying attention to everyone's online beefs and all of that bullshit that everyone's complaining about on one side.
This is woke.
And the other side,
fuck Steve Rogers and the patriarchy.
I really just thought it was a little bit of, it was slightly annoying. There were certain parts of it that I appreciated, but I imagine in the 1980s, if they would have brought, say, someone like Wolverine to the screen or the X-Men, particularly Wolverine would have been great in the 80s with, you know, practical effects, real blood, have someone, I don't know who they could have gotten. Who do you think that they could have gotten to play Wolverine in the 1980s? I know for a while there was a rumor that Glenn Danzig could have played Wolverine. Now, visually, he would have been absolutely fucking perfect. But can the guy act? One thing I found interesting was that Chris Claremont once said that Bob Hoskins could have been the perfect Wolverine. There's a movie called Lassiter from 1984 that features Hoskins and Tom Selleck, and apparently there's a scene that back in the 80s, Chris Claremont thought was a spitting image of Wolverine or Logan himself. I don't know. What do you think of that? Can you picture it? Pretty interesting. I'm going to have to track down that scene myself and see for myself. They probably wouldn't have been able to make a very good movie. They tried to make that Captain America movie in the 90s and that thing sucked. So they probably just weren't ready. But if they had been ready, it would have been really awesome to see Wolverine back in that time period. Because back then, you know, before Wolverine was all the rage now, where he's just all over the place, everywhere, Hugh Jackman, Marvel, you know, $1 billion, all this shit. He was just this weird looking 5'3", hairy little bar brawler with this weird fucked up hair. Just this really bizarre guy. I love the vibe of the X-Men in the 1980s, that era of things. Everything felt a lot more mysterious and special. Now everything is just too accessible. It's everywhere. There's no mystery to it. Pryde of the X-Men, this takes place during that very special era when the X-Men were indeed still mysterious. So check this shit out, and I will see you next time. What's your favorite cartoon of the 1980s? Let me know.